Quite a challenging tender, I think, that you're all embarking on. Not surprising, it's a highly regulated area and it's obviously a very large framework. So not unexpected that some of the questionnaires and parts of the portal that we're going to look at will seem a bit daunting, I think, in advance. So what I would say is we've got plenty of time. The submission date's the 5th of August. You can't go in and break the systems. So the more, if you're maybe a beginner or you're not so familiar with actually using the portals, really just take the time to keep going in and back in and just checking all the different areas. And the other thing to say, again, just quickly, is something of this magnitude and this number of questions and forms, if you can have someone in-house that's maybe not directly involved, but that's there to do some reviewing and checking for you, because you will get a bit word blind, I think, because we'll see that already as we go through the forms. Okay, I'm going to start very quickly with the first of the portals, Public Contract Scotland. Now, in this situation, this is only being used to advertise the notice, so we're not going to be filling in any of the information on Public Contract Scotland, but the contract notice is published there for anyone who's not even started to register for that yet. And also, as I mentioned to Fran, the presentation from Talking Tenders, there's a link there. So I'm just very quickly going to show you those on the screen. We're being recorded, so you'll be able to follow this in the presentation afterwards as well. I'm already logged in, but normally when you go to the publiccontractscotland.gov.uk, if you don't have a login, you'll get a prompt there. It's a very straightforward couple of forms, and you'll be then able to get into the website. And what I would recommend you do for this one is to go to the Search Buyers tab, which is the quickest way to get into any live tender that you know has been published. Just going to put in Glasgow City Council. And search for buyers, and you have your link there. And this brings up what we call the buyer's profile for Glasgow City Council. And what I'm going to look at first is, it's called Future Contract Notices. And this is where the prior information notice was published originally, which some of you might have seen. And it's been updated now. So here we are here, the flexible purchasing arrangements. It's been updated to include some documents related to, it's actually a Word document, but with the YouTube link. So sorry, just record my interest here. So registering an interest, you can click through and click Save. And then it sees that I'm already recorded here. So sorry, my interest list is rather full. So these are all the things we're working on this week. But here's the flexible purchasing one at the bottom. And this, again, this is just the prior information notice. So once you've registered the interest, it means that you can then get into this Documents tab here. So if you click on this, and we'll just scroll down, and you can see at the bottom here, this is the web link document with the recording. I've just had a look at it. For anyone that didn't go to the Talking Tenders presentation, it's hugely useful, really detailed information about the background to the framework, what's been asked for, the kind of emphasis this time around, because this is a new version of a previous framework as well. And because it's the recording, it's obviously quite easily readable, but you see all the slides as it's going through. Okay, so you would just click on that to open it up, and that will give you your link. So I'm just going to go back to the actual call itself. So if I just go back, this is the prior information notice that we were in. So I'll go back on to the, oh, sorry, this is this one. I need to go back into the, sorry, search for buyers and get back to our Glasgow City to get the the full notice, which is just the one that's come out more recently. So back to Glasgow City Council. So future contract is where we found the PIN, and current contract obviously is where we're going to find the one that you're working on just now. And it's there at the very top. So we can see it, we can check, we've got the deadline, 5th of August. And if you click on this, it's going to take us through to a sort of initial notice, but you can see already you're being notified that we're not using Public Contract Scotland to carry out the procurement. You're being diverted to PCS-tender. Confusingly, a very similar name, obviously, but a totally different system, and something that's in quite wide use across the public sector. Some of you may already be quite used to using it with other buyers as well. But for those of you who are less familiar, there's a link here to PCS-tender, but before you leave this site, you need to make a note of this project code, because that's what's going to help us find the tender documents once we get through to PCS-tender. Okay, so if you want to, there's a full notice text. So this is if you see a reference to the contract notice anywhere, this is this, but all the information here will also be in all the tender documents. Just going to click through, and hopefully this keeps us in view of everything on your screen. So this is PCS-tender. Now, I think was it Lisa and Emma, maybe you were talking about you don't have a registration, but you think your organisation will. And this is probably the case on PCS-tender, in that normally it's one organisation in a central department, or it could be something like that, that sets up the registration. Unlike PCS, where maybe lots of people are registered and keeping track of opportunities. So definitely a good idea to find out who's got the registration currently, and just in case there's multiple people registered as well, to make sure it's going from the right person. If you're not registered and you're going through this from the start, there's a link here to register as a supplier, and a bit similar to PCS, it's really is simply just a form, almost like online shopping. So there's nothing tricky about registering, unlike some other portals. So assuming you've done that, I'm just going to sign in. And you then get a form where there's various bits. There's bits about your profile and managing your profile on the right-hand side. There's a help desk who can be useful. You know, if you find something technically is not working with the system, maybe something's not uploading, or documents you can't open up. Well, any of that, we go through to the help desk. So what we're looking for here, and this is where we got in the message on PCS, it told us to go to this ITTs area and give us the project code. So I'm just going to click on that. And actually, sorry, excuse me, I'm going to go back just one step, because I'm going to show you this stage right from the start under a different login. Great, and this way we'll see it right from the very beginning. So click on ITTs, and what it does, it brings us into an area called ITTs open to all suppliers. And this effectively is a big long list. It could be, you can see it there, 1, 2, 3, 4 pages long. So what we want to do is use the filter, and the one that we were given is something called project code. And then there's a box in the middle, and I always use contains. Seems to be the most reliable way to get what you're looking for. And then we're going to put in the 29383 code, which is the one that's going to bring us to this one here. So much easier, takes you straight to the exact document, so there's no danger that you log into the wrong ones. Okay, so when we click on this, it's going to move everything to this area here, my ITTs. And that means as you maybe fill in some documents, you log out, you go back in again, you're always coming back to this My ITTs area. Okay, so I've clicked on it, but we're not quite finished yet. The system wants you to express an interest, which you can click on, and it always has these little bit alarming boxes keep popping up. It's really just to confirm, do you want to do what you said you wanted to do? And you'll only go through this process once just to get started. Okay, so this brings us into the kind of title area, and we're into now this kind of what I would call the full proper questionnaire. There's two main tabs, ITT details. It's got things called settings, and that's where you'll find there's a deadline for clarification questions, for example, the 29th of July at noon, and it'll also give you the definitive submission date, which is the 5th of August. We're going to take a look at buyer attachments first, and then we'll go on to my response, which is where all the other questions are. But just before we do that, I'm going to click on these three dots here, because for some of you, you don't necessarily, if you're working within a team, there's going to be lots of people contributing, you don't want them all logging in and out of your questionnaire as it's live. So these three dots at this stage give you a printable view. And if you click on that, I'll not go through that just now, but it offers you the chance to do a PDF version. And what you'll get, and this one will be rather long, I think, but the PDF will show every single part of the questionnaire that we can see live on the screen. And I just find it really useful if you're saying to someone, look, you know, I want you to contribute to this part. You can send them the whole thing, but you can highlight the area that they're going to be doing. If you're reporting to maybe senior management, they want to know what everything's all about, rather than running through again directly online, use that PDF download. And it's a much kind of safer way to see the whole thing. And even if you're sitting around the desk, you can discuss together who's doing this part. It's almost like a nice big bid plan checklist. Okay, so if we get on to the actual proper tabs now, aside from the settings, I'm going to click on buyer attachments, because we would always recommend, before you even start to look at the response, that you take the time to properly read through all the different documents. This one has a mass download option, which I do normally use, so it means that you literally get absolutely everything, and it goes into a massive zip file altogether. The only tricky part is in the process of opening these up, and I think some of you have commented on the Q&A already, files of all these documents are hugely long, and it's not easy to download it into somewhere kind of in the depths of your project documents. So you sometimes have to, I don't know, download it to a kind of My Documents, quite a high level folder. And then once they're downloaded, it's much easier to copy and paste them into your kind of work in progress files. So I'm not going to mass download just now, but just to show you the way that these attachments are structured. And again, I said I had to chat with the procurement team and the commissioners just at the end of last week. And one of the main things to emphasize for them is absolutely please read through all of these documents, obviously more than once. They're arranged a little bit in alphabetical order here, which is not necessarily the logical one, but you can see the basically, so the additional documents have kind of come at the top there. There's a transition plan, there's that equalities, I think, impact assessment, so maybe more background documents. This one's critical. This is the technical questions, and we'll see that in the form, but these are templates, and you open this up. And so you need to be downloading these ASAP if you haven't done this already. There's one for sustainability statement, which applies across all lots. There's one for Fair Work First, exactly the same. And then you'll need to pick off whichever of these care themed lots you're actually going to be bidding for. Within these templates, you're going to be getting two questions. So one is a kind of capacity, how will you do these things? And another one gives you a little scenario case study type arrangement. So I'm not going to cover those in detail because these are obviously part of the content, but to let you know that questions 1 and 2 are together. This is where it gets a wee bit clunky. So to move back up again, you've got to go back onto this buyer attachment link up here, and that should bring us back to the folders. So technical questions, bidder agreement is where the terms and conditions, the framework agreement are. As part of the technical submission, you're asked to confirm that you can provide all the policies that are asked for in this agreement. And unhelpfully, they're not listed in a checklist, so you're going to have to search through and check what all the different references are for that. As you would expect, there's a folder here with financial elements. This financial viability one, I would be looking at today, if possible, because it's going to tell you whether you reach the bar in terms of being able to bid, in terms of your financial turnover, your profit, and what they call the sort of current gearing ratios and so on. So I'll say a wee bit about that later on. Community benefits. Glasgow City Council, I think, almost invented community benefits back in 2008. So they're very, very demanding, I would say, and I think some people have queried this in the Q&A as well. So rather than just a single menu where you would just tick the box and provide what you're going to be suggesting, you need to do several things. So there's an ITT document which tells you the approach. There's the menu, which has got all the different items and what the scores are. And then there's a methodology, which is where you're going to have to say how are you going to deliver them. And then there's also some additional guidance here as well. So that community benefits folder, I'd be getting that downloaded immediately because I wouldn't leave that till last. It's not scored, but it is a mandatory pass-fail element of the submission, and as I say, a bit weightier than you would normally see in other tenders. So community benefits, the ITT and the specification documents, I think largely invitation to tender is where you get all the kind of like the legalities, how it's going to work, what the different requirements are for actually running the tender, how it's going to be evaluated. So again, I would have that as one of my first documents to read as well, and clearly the specification for the different areas. The supplier's response guide is how to use the PCS-tender system, so that if you're not used to using PCS-tender, that could be quite helpful, but it's very generic. It's nothing to do with this particular tender. And then the next section here, this is actually really quite important documents in this one too. Let me just open this one up. There's a health and safety vetting questionnaire, which first parts of it you have to fill in, everybody has to fill in. If you've got an ISO certification or something like CHAS or Safe Contractor or the SSIP, I think beyond the first couple of questions, you don't need to fill in anything else. But if you don't have those, then that questionnaire has to be filled out completely. And it's fairly demanding in terms of lots of different areas of health and safety. So yes, get maybe somebody in your team, and ideally if you have an external expert for health and safety, they could assist with that. There's a spreadsheet where you can choose your lots and category of care, and then we go into the registration criteria. So again, for each lot, you'll get an Excel spreadsheet asking about registration numbers, coverage, and so on. And I think there have been some questions about whether people are, if you're looking for a variation, which so I don't know the details of that, but I think if you are planning a variation of your service, you still have to fill this in and give a bit of information. But again, I think all that area is something you can be asking the partnership about through the messaging. Okay, so sorry, we're scooting through fairly quickly on these, but I think really just to emphasize this buyer attachments area here, which comes as soon as you're in this ITT part, absolutely important. And get support, you know, get as many people around the table on that, reading through and double checking and so on. Okay, so I'm going to just quickly come out of the ITT and move on to the messaging tab, because as you're starting to read through these documents, that quite often is when you get all your questions. So in this area here, you can already click in and have a look. So there's 19 messages. It's showing here, because I'm on a different login, that I've not opened any of them. But obviously, you want to be opening these up and reading the answers. Try please to do that. It's so annoying if you're a buyer and people keep asking the same questions that have been answered before. So I quite often in our bid plans, we keep a spreadsheet of all the questions and answers anyway, and then it's easier to refer to. And it also helps you if you're writing some answers as well. Okay, the other thing about the received messages is whoever's email address is attached to your registration, they will be the ones getting the alerts to say that a question has come through and been answered. And it'll come from something a bit odd called alert@bravosolutions.co.uk, which is the software underneath PCS-tender. So you need to check who's getting those. Ideally, it might be that you've set it up as info@ or tenders@ so that there's 2 or 3 of you seeing these. Failing that, if you're not getting the alerts, you need to be just coming in, logging in, and making sure that you've not missed any questions coming through. It's super easy to create a message, and you can just fill it in. You're asked to kind of classify it, you know, what's it about, what's the subject, write your message, and if you want to, also there's an area at the bottom where you can add an attachment. That tends to be more at a later stage when you're asked to maybe clarify something, but super easy to attach that. You just click on here and then send your message through. What's quite nice is, and I'll not do it here because it will go actually through to the partnership, when you send your messages under sent, there's nothing here, but you can actually see there's a column that says, has it been opened by the buyer and has it been replied to? So if it's been replied to, obviously it goes to everyone, not just you. Well, that's not true. Occasionally you can ask if it's very commercially sensitive, you could ask for it to be a kind of one-to-one, but it's a little bit unusual. But in principle, all the answers go back to all the bidders. But I like to see if they've even opened the message, and if it's gone a couple of days and nobody's even opened it, I kind of get straight on and ask the same question again, or ask them to please, you know, confirm when they're going to have a look at it. And you can draft messages as well. You don't need to, you can draft it and send it later. Okay, so the message is very simple, but as Fran says, and the buyers will confirm, you cannot contact any of the buyers directly at this point onwards now. And your deadline's the 29th of July to get the questions in. Okay, so we're now going to click on ITT details again and get into my response. And before you can open up, because it looks here as if you can see all the questions, but in fact you can't do anything at this stage. And you need to go up to this box here, intend to respond, and click on that. And what that does is then open these, what they call envelopes, down below. There is a facility where you can fill in all your answers to these questions in Excel and then import them in. I've never done that because I've had experience in the past where just a slight change to format kind of prevents the whole thing from matching up. So I find it a lot easier literally just to go through and fill it in. The only thing that could be easier is if you're maybe sending out that questionnaire to other people to fill in, but the danger is they change something on the format and it could be a bit risky. So I'll point that out, but I would tend not to necessarily use that for a big bid. You get the chance again to get this printable view. So if you've missed it the first time around. So looking down then at what you have to fill in, this is the absolutely standard way that all tenders are structured in the public sector, which hopefully you'll be fairly familiar with. The qualification is all about your organisation as it stands just now. We'll have a quick look down those sections, but there's actually, this is quite an easy qualification section, you'll be glad to hear, possibly compared to some of the other areas. So let's have a quick look at that first. And the whole point of PCS-tender is that it is literally just a big online questionnaire that you're scrolling down. The tricky bit with PCS-tender is that lots of these boxes aren't questions, they're just instructions. And when you see 209 questions, it looks horrendous, but some of these are, you know, if you say yes, there's another 2 or 3, or no, or whatever. So you will not be answering 200 questions. Another thing to point out before we go any further is if you sit and just read through and maybe fill a few things in, don't keep updating it. If you don't save your changes, the system will kind of close down after about 15-20 minutes of no action. So as you're going through, just keep clicking on the save changes. Annoyingly, I think it still brings you right back up to the top of the form nowadays, which it didn't used to do. So you have to keep kind of finding your place again. So save changes in any of the sections, and then save and exit is maybe when you've done enough and you want to close it down and come back another time. Validate response you would do further down the process, and this is just to check that any mandatory fields you've not forgotten to fill in, it would highlight those. Okay, so the first question, absolutely standard, you know, have you read the documents? You'll say yes, you'll put the date in. And then we get on to this single procurement document, which is kind of what used to be called a pre-qualification questionnaire. You'll get a bit of a blurb about this. It'll tell you you can update it in your profile, which we saw a bit earlier in that login space. But most of the rest of this will be just very basic information. The name that they want at the top here is your company name. It's not your personal name. And the commissioning team have asked me to make a huge point to everybody. One of the biggest problems they have is that people don't use your official name as it is in Companies House. So you need to get onto Companies House. If you're, I think probably most people will be registered, you won't be sole traders, and check the exact spelling with anything in brackets. And that name is what you must use in any of the documents, like certificates attached, health and safety questionnaire. All of these have to use exactly the same name. Okay, and double check, because if you've used PCS-tender before, when you come to open up this qualification, you may find all of this is already pre-populated from your profile. So don't just accept that, you need to go down all of these and double check. DUNS, if you don't have one, it's kind of linked to your limited status. It's Dun and Bradstreet, and it kind of links into credit checking and things like that. And you can very easily just do a please, what would I normally do? So look up my DUNS number UK, and all you need to do is put in your company registration number, and it'll come back with it's like a 9-digit code, and the buyer teams use that a lot to track down financials. So this is all very basic. Other than that, names, address. This is crucial. Who's the contact person, the phone, the mobile, the email, because that will be used possibly later at clarification stage. You need to add in if you have a parent company. So again, the names must be exactly as per Companies House, and similarly, if you're a parent and then there's an ultimate parent company over and above that. And then your legal status generally is private limited company. There might be some, if you're another, like a CIC or some other structure, you would click on that one there. Okay, so that's first part, really, other than the name issue, I think is very straightforward. There's a question about your size of the organisation. The bidder is asked if you're a supported business. Now, supported means that you have more than 30% of your staff, your personnel, are either disabled or disadvantaged. So if you're not sure about that, I would maybe just do a double check on some of the definitions. I think some of the procurement, the supplier journey or the procurement journey on the Scottish Government websites are good for these definitions. But again, this isn't scored or anything, it's really just for information. Okay, we're now into part 2. This is a really odd one. So basically, if you're a UK business, then basically that's what you choose. I think this goes back to the days when it was a European form. However, once we get beyond that in section 2, this is where if you're bidding as a group or a consortium or a joint venture, you need to declare that. So there are various types. A consortium would generally be a consortium company, which is a kind of legal entity in its own, possibly made up of different members who could be companies in their own right. The lead plus subcontractors, I think, is slightly different. So I wouldn't say yes to this group question if it was me as the lead, but I've got a few subcontractors because there is a question later on about those. But once you say you're part of a group, then there's some other categories that would open up that would, so I'll just show you that if you do say yes. Yeah, so they want to know the role of the group, the bid leader. Do you have a name for the group? And then the interesting point here is you need to complete a simplified SPD, Single Procurement Document attachment, which tends to be the first 3 sections of the form that we're in. So each of the members need to do that as well. Now, I don't see that attached, that SPD simplified, so I'm going to ask a question about that and see where it is. I might see it later on. You need to tick the box here for whichever lots you're going for. Lot 6, I think you tick if you want to, but there's no separate questions for that one. You're then asked about the representative of the bidder. Now, that's usually maybe someone empowered to represent you. I tend to fill this in with, well, my name is the company director, so whoever the company main representative is, you can fill that in on their behalf. And it's got just, again, pretty basic information. And then there's another question here, which is always a bit strange. There are certain selection criteria, obviously, to get even through the first stage of this tender, which are largely to do with the financials, insurance, registration. Now, it could be if you're in a group, you're maybe relying on one of the people in your consortium to be registered for a certain type of provision, and that the only way that you'll pass as a group is by relying on them. So that's kind of scenario where I think I'd be saying yes, this question about capacities. And again, if you said yes, they would ask you to submit an SPD for any of those entities if they're different to the group. And I don't see that they've actually added in an option for that SPD. And then this 2D one is the much more normal one. So do you intend to subcontract, which in certain situations you may. And at that point, you're asked normally to give, as far as you know, because you might not know, obviously, for the next 6 years, what you're going to do, is there a list there that you can give? And I would obviously, to be honest, I'd be putting in their sort of proper address, maybe even a website, just so that the buyers can see who it is that they're dealing with. And here we are actually, so sorry, subcontractors, this little triangle here, if you click on that, that will open up this SPD attachment for any subcontractors, and they will need to fill that in as well. Okay, I can take questions on that at the end. It's a wee bit tricky, this part 2. Part 3, hopefully, if any of you have been bidding before, this is what we would normally just call the yes/no questions. And it's a rather long list of convictions and all the reasons why you might be banished from public sector contracts. And the format is, you get the text and the description, and you basically have to say yes or no. So it's no to virtually everything. I would just ignore this bit because we're based in the Netherlands as well. The Netherlands, they have databases where you can check people's criminal history and all that sort of stuff. And we just don't have that here. So I would just, under the electronic version bits, just type in not applicable or something like that. Now, this is a very long list, so I'm not going to spend ages going through it, but the answer to all of them should be no, particularly for all these serious crimes, drugs trafficking, but there's a couple here that are trick ones, because these, obviously, there's one about tax, which must be yes, and there's a follow-on one about paying social security contributions, which obviously should be a yes as well. And then all the others are generally no. Now, the only exclusion to that would be when it comes to some of these environmental law, health and safety law, because people do, and particularly larger companies, you know, they might have a health and safety improvement notice, but if you've actually been prosecuted, you would need to say, and it's the same for like environment, if you broke any environmental laws for pollution, or it's not, I can see it in construction, these things happen, not all the time, but you can see people where they have to say yes, but then you say it's self-cleansing. What did we do? How did we react? And what do we do to stop it happening again? Social law, again, would be maybe more sort of employment and that type of thing, and labour laws and so on. So some of these generally would be no, but if you know of anything, then you should say yes, but give a good account. And it's up to the buyer. That's what they call discretionary. It's up to them to decide if they're happy with your reasons why and what you've done about it. Another nice list here: bankrupt, winding up, in arrangements with creditors. So again, some of those, we had a customer who lost a contract. They were second, and they found out the next week that the company who won was in court in Ayrshire for not paying their VAT. So they reported that, and the company who'd won it were immediately taken off the contract because they'd ticked that they had paid their tax, and clearly they hadn't. Okay, so again, all of these generally are no's. You can see it looks terrible on screen, but actually once you fill this in, you can get this out of the way, I would say, within the first few days of starting your submission. Okay, so this is the part 3. All right, now I'm just going to go on because, so 3D is the last question in all these kind of yes/no ones. There's only one question in part 4, in part 3, which is if you've said that you were subcontracting, you need to estimate the proportion that you might be subcontracting. I think that's quite tricky. Nobody can necessarily check it, but I guess it's just to get an idea of, if you've listed 2 or 3 subcontractors, that it's not that they're doing 90% of the work. So you need to put in a figure there. If you need to fill it in, I think it might be a mandatory question. So, okay, and then the last bit is a declaration, and this is what we're going to see in the technical section, a lot of questions about these various different elements. But at this stage in qualification, all you need to do is literally type in, so the name, so it's the same as, really, I would keep it the same as the contact name at the top of the document. Ideally, the kind of senior manager, you know, responsible for the submission, or a director, position, date and place. There is a space for attachments, but I don't think from any of the questions here at the moment, couldn't see anything. Maybe SPDs, mind you, I think they were attached to the question, so Okay, so I've not gone and saved my changes as I'm going along, but that's been fairly quick. So I'll just save and exit. You get another of these. Okay, so we've done the qualifications. So this is us back to the commercial response is very straightforward. And basically, you've got a price schedule document, which is in the buyer's attachments. And also, you've got a confirmation statement, just yes, no, that you filled everything in properly. And that is it. So the commercial side, super easy. Not doing your pricing, obviously, because that can always be it. Okay, so I think you can start to see the format in the portal. There's a mixture of drop down like yes, no. You can get tick the box documents. Sometimes it's what these 2,000 character text box to fill in. And in certain situations, you have to upload a document. And that's where a lot of these buyer attachments or the templates we need to upload. So the biggie really is the technical envelope or proposal. The questions in themselves, there's only further down when we get to the award ones, is where you would do what I would call the traditional kind of like essay type, 2-page response. And virtually everything else in this technical stage is uploading another document to be filled in. So first off is the financial viability spreadsheet. So again, I would emphasize, I would look at that first and get your finance people or your accountant to fill that in for you, because there are certain standards that you need to reach and they'll do the numbers for you. If it turns out, a good example, I think one of them is like you've got to be in profit for the last 3 years. If you haven't, but it's because you've invested a huge amount in capacity building or premises or whatever, it's always, I wouldn't withdraw at that stage. I would just be ready to prepare a statement that justifies why your figures aren't meeting the mark. If you're miles off on absolutely everything, okay, at that point you might have to do a bid, no bid decision. But if there's a good reason for not reaching the targets that they've given, I would aim to persevere if you can. That might be an example where you want to contact them but ask for a confidential reply back as well. They want copies of accounts, and they always say audited, but I think actually audited, strictly speaking, is only applies to over certain levels of turnover, but properly prepared and signed off by an accountant and the chief executive is, I would class as audited here as well. So you're going to fill these in. When you're uploading, if you click on the browse and it opens up, so here you can see it's come into my downloads folder randomly. You just click on the file that you want, open it, and that's it uploaded there. And you can just check that if it says 0 kilobytes, it means something's wrong and the file's corrupted. And if you change your mind, you can just delete it and just go through the process again. Next up is insurance. I would point out here, because again, that is quite unusual. At this stage, they already want a covering letter from the insurance brokers. You're going to need time to get that organised. And that has to come, basically this to whom it may concern letter, which the brokers are very familiar with. Okay, and they will, in fact, ask for some examples of insurance to be sent, whereas normally you would send that at a second stage. They've given the amounts, the values. Either you've got it, which is a yes, or you don't, but you commit. If you don't commit to obtain it, you'll basically not get through. It's as simple as that. But it could be, if you don't have it, I would tend to ask my broker if they could provide a letter to say the level is, well, you don't have it in place, but we're able, we're willing that this company, we will be able to quote them. There's no problem with them getting it. So that's a reassurance. Or it might be that, oh, well, we've got Particularly I think it's a professional indemnity one that's quite high, isn't it? We've got so many million cover, but we are willing to, the broker's able to secure you the higher level if you need it. Okay, so there's a wee bit of extra work. There's lots of additional insurance, obviously, because of the sector that you're in compared to most other tenders. And this is where they want you to add in the insurance documents. And what you'll need to do, because this could be quite a lot of individual documents, you'll need to organise them in a folder and then create a zip file. If anyone doesn't know how to create a zip file, we've got a few slides, I think, that we've used in other STP training. So if you remind me, Fran, I'll look those out if I can get them and put those up as well, if anyone needs to follow that. Okay, next one's health and safety. So I've talked just briefly about that. So if you've got this SSIP, you don't need to fill in the whole thing, but you will have to fill in some of it. And that's in the buyer attachment. And particularly, I think some of the areas, you'll need to actually put your certificates in, your health and safety policy if you don't have some of these formal certifications. So yeah, lean heavily on your health and safety consultant if you have one. Healthy Working Lives provide free support to small businesses as well, and huge amount of additional kind of background, help with risk assessments, templates, and so on. Okay, I think I just saw a quick question about asking about the to whom it may concern letter when you're actually putting up the documents. I agree. I don't know if you've got the documents and they're the genuine thing. Usually it's the other way around. Usually they get the to whom it may concern and they don't bother about the certificate. So I suspect that's belts and braces, and the to whom it may concern is quite an easy reference for the partnership people checking this. It saves them digging through the documents to find out what the excess levels are and all these sort of things. The care group lot and category. So again, this is where you're going to be downloading the document, this one that we saw in the buyer's attachment, so fairly straightforward. This one with the registrations, again, it's the same principle, but obviously that's a little bit more tricky because you'll have to fill these in for each of the lots that you're bidding for. So this is good where you've got a nice checklist, and also to notify if you're maybe not quite registered yet, but you're planning to be for something coming up. There's a note here about urgent or emergency notices. So it could be that you might be disqualified and asked to bid a further round until those issues have been resolved. And I think as well, there's a minimum requirement here. So you've got to achieve grade 3. And I think they said that might, the tendering, they're talking tenders, and some categorizations, that's the same as a good. So again, if you're bidding and you can see that you've only got a 2 score, a grade 2, that's basically not going to be accepted for that category. But these are all questions you can go back to the partnership on. Okay, and this is where you would add in these different, the registration related, the care inspectorate documents. Okay, there's a few supplementary questions there that are just tick the box. And PVG similarly. And again, no, I don't commit. That's you out the door, I would think, if you don't commit to those. Health and social care, again, these are all just commitment statements. And this is the one about the policies. So you are going to have to do a bit of a trawl through, because at the request for documentation stage, if you say yes to this, before the contract's awarded, they'll be asking you to provide evidence of all the policies that appear in the T's and C's. Freedom of information. So again, you're given the opportunity to say what you don't want disclosed, and you've got to say the reason why and the proposed time. I would normally choose the period of the framework, so 6 years. the public bodies they can't guarantee this. You can put your request in, but as they'll have said in the guidance, they can't 100% guarantee not to have to disclose it at some point. Okay, and then I think they've allowed an attachment here if your reasons why exceed the word limit, but I think that's already quite a big space to fill that in. Tenderers amendments is interesting because in most other public tenders you don't get a chance to what they call qualify the terms and conditions. So if there is something that you feel is really demanding in the T's and C's, I think this is where you could raise it, but they have emphasised this is not a negotiated procedure, so it can't be anything substantial or substantive matters. They'll take a look at it and they'll provide a response to each. So there's a certificate, I think, in the buyer's attachment that you can then upload at this stage. Prompt payment is now legal, so you need to pay all your suppliers, subcontractors within 30 days, and you also need to track that they're also paying within 30 days. It's a bit of a cascade as well, so that can be a bit demanding if you do have quite a few subcontractors. More certificates here. So again, I'm just going to whiz through these. You're just going to say yes, and then you'll be asked to provide something with a proper wet copy signature later on. Professional integrity is new, so it relates to ethical trading, modern slavery, so obviously a very important area. And again, in this one, it's I confirm. And they do ask, if you have a turnover over 36 million, if you're a big national, you will be obliged legally to have a modern slavery statement on your website. So that's what you need to provide the link there. Okay, so that a lot of that first part of the technical form is a bit more kind of compliance, legalities and so on. This is the community benefits one. And there's various elements. So there's a menu. Now that is where you're asked there's 9 different thresholds. And I think the top threshold is where you're earning, can't even remember how many millions or hundreds of millions of pounds it was from the framework. So I guess that's cumulative after 6 years. But that menu, it's quite tricky. You're going to have to go in and spend quite a bit of time. I think there's an error in the spreadsheet, so I've put a question in and I'm waiting to see what they come back with, because it's not, I did an experiment to see how many new jobs would you need to create to get their 1,620 points, and it didn't calculate. So watch out for maybe if I'm correct, or maybe I'm a bit stupid and I've done it the right way. See what comes from that. So the menu is the first part, and then for all these different menus options that you've put in, you need to complete a methodology. So how will you deliver this? This again can be quite tricky. I would advise you to make use of any community benefits people, because I think you can contact them in advance of the tender, even though they're with the council, and think about, who are the stakeholders in the schools. There's also what they call the Senefits system, which is where they do all the tracking of the benefits. So you would need to mention how you would report for that. So I think this is a really challenging area for what you're submitting, just because there's so much to cover. Voluntary is voluntary. It's not scored, so it's not a pass-fail. So if there's anything else that you could possibly think of that hasn't been highlighted in their menu, you can add it in there. Okay, sustainability. So there's a statement, and it's a fairly open statement. What I would do is point you to, in the invitation to tender, I think, where are we? Yeah, the invitation to tender, there's a link to the Glasgow Climate Plan. So I would download that immediately and take a look and take your sort of lead from there on the sort of things that the council are worried about. And here it's very much, when you say what are you doing, they're looking for actions, measures, But remember, this is a long-term framework. So you can say what you're doing just now, but you can also allude to what you think you might be doing in the coming years. And there's a great emphasis now on measuring, being able to measure your carbon emissions, doing training, linking like Zero Waste Scotland is a fantastic resource for all different ways that you can get support and your whole sustainability agenda. And I think I did ask the question of the procurement teams. They will take into account when they're doing the pass-fail on this. They haven't said what the criteria are for pass-fail. But if you're a small third sector organisation, you wouldn't be expected to provide the same level and depth of content that a big national provider would do. In my experience, sometimes the smaller organisations are the ones that precisely do the nice things with big impacts, particularly on biodiversity and those sort of things. Okay, so that has to be uploaded. It might be somebody on your team that you get help with that one as well. Remember, just make sure that you ask around and see who's got the expertise there to give some support. Okay, so I'm just checking our time, we're 20 to 4. This is the what we call the award questions. So this is important because these are the ones that are scored. These technical questions here, the award questions themselves constitute 45% of the 60% that is the what we call the technical scoring. So there's templates here, so you're not making up, it's handy in your own versions. You've got to download the template and you've got to stick strictly to, I think it's a 2-page limit. But if I remember, I think you are allowed an extra page of diagrams or photos or whatever. So read these templates here in the buying attachments have very detailed, clear guidance, what they're looking for. Okay, and it's just a case of working out, obviously, which lots you need to download, and you need to fill in a separate response for each of these because they will each have a different scenario, and that is a case study bit in the second question. That's the bit that needs a lot of attention. You need to be like, consulting with everyone in your team. I was working with a charity yesterday and they kind of involve the frontline people a lot for ideas, on how things are done, how do you meet the challenges and so on, giving some examples as well to demonstrate how things are done properly or more effectively and so on. Okay, so we've gone over this fairly quickly, but this is a very important section. The next part, so this fair work first is worth 15%. So that's the remaining part to take you up to your 60. And again, it's got a template. The fair work is divided into 7 criteria. And it's things like developing your workforce, consultation, respecting trade unions. So that, again, is they're asking what do you do and how do you achieve these fair work practices, but they are asking for evidence, which I've never actually seen being asked for before. So that could be, in some cases, is fine because you'll have, I don't know, staff surveys or a consultation document or minutes of a meeting or something, training records or a training plan, whatever. But there is one, I think, when they ask about fire and hire, we oppose fire and hire policies. And I'm not so sure how you would evidence that. So I've asked that as a question as well for clarification. Okay, final one here is lot 6. There aren't any questions. All you have to do is say yes or no. So this is their kind of any other, not quite miscellaneous, but anything that doesn't fit the other 5 lots. If you don't want to be considered for that, you can happily say no. It's not a question. All right, and then this one here is have I downloaded carefully completed everything. So that is the technical one. And again, it is quite a challenging piece to complete. And there are areas there where you might need to call on expertise on sustainability, fair work, and so on. I don't know, there might be resources. Have a look at the SCP website, because they have some resources in terms of some policies and some of these more kind of background areas. So if you've got everything sorted and finally, you're absolutely happy, you've triple checked that you filled everything in, there is a validate button, which you can get in each of the sections at the top, and that would highlight if there's a mandatory question missed. Mandatory, have a little asterisk. All of that's done, you're ready to submit. If you click submit, you obviously get the OK, so it's not easy to click by mistake. But if you had clicked and submitted, and assuming, please, that you've submitted at least a few days before the deadline, and something comes up where you think, oh, help, you know, I wish we'd mentioned this or that, it's absolutely easy to just log in again. As soon as you log in and you open it up, it will give you the chance, and it says keep changes or discard. So if you make a change, you click keep the changes, and then it says, are you ready to resubmit? And you can keep resubmitting right the way up to the deadline. Not recommended, please, to do it very late, but it's a very easy system to go back to if you absolutely need to. And that, sorry for such a big long session, that's it on the demo through the system. I'm going to keep the system open, Fran, I think, just so that we can go back if there's anything anybody wants.